Hello, and welcome back to another interview from White Album 2. Today we are doing a White Album 2 PS3 interview. This interview is with Naoya Shimokawa. We have heard from him before. Let's hear from him again. For those who want to face society with all their strength, Dengeki PlayStation presenting an interview with Aquaplus director Naoya Shimokawa about White Album 2, The Other Side of Happiness, which has received high ratings in this publication. Also, he's not only the Aquaplus director, but he is also in charge of FIX Records, and he is a music producer. And he produced a lot of the music for White Album 2, which is incredible. To start, please tell us why it was decided that White Album 2 would be ported to the PS3. This is a little bit vague, but right around the time immediately following the release of Part 2 of the PC edition, we were thinking that in the winter of this year, we would like to release a consumer version. As it happens, among the users of our company's products, there are many people who don't use their PCs for gaming. Interesting. Interesting. Granted, this is from a while back, right? This was the time of the PS3. And I guess at that time, I didn't use my PC for gaming either, so maybe it was a bit less common because of that. And since we wanted to see as many people play as possible, the popularity of the PC version led to us consider porting it to the PS3. Before that, the preparations themselves had been coming dimly into shape since before the PC version went on sale. The PC edition drew extraordinarily high ratings from its users. What do you think is the primary factor in that? I think the overwhelmingly enthralling story could be about the sum of it. Apart from that, there aren't all that many games that go beyond high school and depict the growth of the characters over a long period of time afterward. Absolutely, 10 out of 10, yes. I am so glad to see them as adults. I really wish more games would be focused on adulthood. Obviously, yeah, it starts in high school, and you get to see the high school crush. But then, viewing it from an adult lens, you're like, okay, well, now they're grown up. I know their backstory because I played through it, but now they need to make decisions and grow up. And I think that was a huge part of me liking it as well, was just that time period, that time lapse. Really, really good. Add that to the devices and directions of the scenario, all of the missed meetings happening at a level that could be inevitability or it could be coincidence, but it's impossible to tell. It's a realistic human drama in a perfectly depicted form. And he's not even modest. Not that he needs to be. When you read users' impressions on the internet, you definitely see an overwhelming number of people saying that they loved the story. But if it's a question of whether you can praise it highly and recommend it to other people, the main story has a lot of elements that tighten up your chest. And it's not necessarily the type of work that can be easily recommended. It's true. Even when I'm recommending it, I'm like, if you want to play a really sad game and cry a lot, then you should play it. In the case of romance-focused AVGs, adventure games, there are some people who prefer pure love and aren't fans of love triangles, while there may be others playing the same game who like the reasoning component, but not the romance component. However, I feel like this work has what I would call an interest that surpasses genre. For example, I don't like horror movies very much, especially so-called grotesque types. But I've watched films in the Saw franchise, which is internationally praised highly, and it's definitely interesting. It has the guro element, guro meaning gore in Japanese, but it's still interesting. I might call this game another work that stands at a point outside the fences of genre, and can give its own kind of enjoyment that way. I'll go ahead and say I did not like Saw. I can appreciate it from a psychological standpoint, but at some point it just kind of felt like, let's just put a bunch of people on screen and torture them for fun. But that's a side story. Let's talk more about White Album 2, because I actually do like that. The PC version was sold in 2 parts. Was that planned from the beginning? There were several different circumstances at work, but as I was reading the scenario in progress, I thought that breaking it apart would make things more interesting. So there was an intentional component. Though I was definitely aware that there would be some backlash from users over the split. Yeah, because it was not cheap. Neither part was cheap. Now later on, they ended up just making the complete version and selling that as the extended edition, which had both parts. But if you bought both parts separately, that's expensive and frustrating to a fan. I hate how they're doing more and more of that these days. It seemed to me like the gap between the 2 parts served to heighten the emotional impact of the second part. I agree, since continuing into a second part means you can't give it a perfect, complete ending to the first part. When the second part was released, we also released it as a set with the first part. But I think the state of mind of the players who played the first, waited a year, and then played the second is completely different from those who played the whole thing as a set. Their reactions diverged a bit, and the characters they got attached to were different too. Which is a very interesting point when you stop and stew on it after introductory chapter and then play the rest a year later. You could end up getting super, super, super attached to, like, let's say, Kazusa. And then when you start up closing chapter, you might get angry and upset that she's just, like, not here. That's frustrating. Whereas if you just play it all and then jump into CC immediately, I don't know. I feel maybe it might be easier rather than the heartbreak of, like, no, where is she? Experience the other side of happiness all at once. The PS3 edition collects the 2 parts of the PC edition into 1 volume. What do you think will be the appeal of that? I think the biggest merit is in being able to play this thing you want to enjoy from start to end all at once. If you can play from start to end all at once, you're a demon. You gotta take breaks to, like, cry. Cry and absorb the source material and then continue the next day. At least that's how I played it. The way the PC version was set up had interest in the completeness of the no one knows what's going to happen next element. But though we considered using the same technique with the PS3 version, we realized that with spoilers around, there was really no point in splitting it. If we stopped the first part at an uncertain point, there was a possibility that people might just go find the info on the internet. Therefore, we decided to make the PS3 version a set, so that people could play the second part without getting any unintended preconceptions. Which is a good point. When it was released for the PC, there was no worry of spoilers. But now that the whole game's already out, why would you break up the PS3 version? That would be an obvious money grab. I would not like that. By the way, is it set up so you have a choice of what point to start from when you play? No. You start with part 1. Playing the first part is what allows you to be surprised and moved by the developments in the second part. Which is very true. What is CC without IC? I don't even think it would play that well as a standalone game. Because you probably just find Setsuna, like, super obnoxious. Like, who is this girl? Why is she there but not really there? IC, you need that backstory. What is the meaning of The Other Side of Happiness, the subtitle of the PS3 edition? The subtitle describes a concept that we've had for White Album 2 ever since the project's initial planning stages. During my first meeting with Maruto-san, scenario writer Fumiaki Maruto, we decided that we wanted White Album 2 to depict the other side of happiness. I believe everybody was happy as a child, but once you grow up, there can be both happiness and unhappiness. The idea was to give a complex picture of what exists on that other side. Which is a beautiful quote, and I do like the way this concept came to be. In one of Shimokawa's other interviews, he mentions, or perhaps it was Maruto's interview, one of these two that were just talking about this, they had mentioned, on the other side of happiness is obviously unhappiness. If you're with Setsuna, Kazusa is going to be unhappy, and so on. But one of the other things to realize is that it's not only unhappiness, you will find more happiness in other things in the future. You will find new roots for yourself. And I think that was a really powerful thing to me. Like to think about that, to think about how in Kazusa's route, you see Setsuna recovering and becoming herself. If you go with Setsuna's route, you find Kazusa moving on and becoming one with herself and with her career. And I think that's important to remember. So, moving on to the White Album 2 PS3 interview part 2. The PS3 edition had a lot of new components added, but the main focus is on the new scenario, right? Yes. Maruto-san handled not only the writing of the new scenario, but also general supervision of the alterations that were made. Maruto-san had managed the scenarios for a great number of romance AVGs, adventure games, and a lot of them had been ported to systems like the PSP, but he's actually taken the stance of not dealing with consumer editions. However, Maruto-san has taken such great care with this particular work, and when we made the request of him, he agreed to take it on, which makes this the first consumer edition scenario that Maruto-san has ever handled. I'd say that's something to look forward to. Oh, absolutely. And considering the extra scenario is amazing, yeah, something to look forward to. What made you decide to introduce motion portraits to the game, like with the PS3 edition of White Album? Much like with movies, having the characters move increases the level of empathy, since it makes them seem more alive. Also, it was pretty difficult technique for the PC, so we added them as one of the production choices for enlivening the story. Plus, after refining this technique through games like White Album and Two Hearts 2 DX Plus, we felt like we had to use it. Yeah, because if you didn't, fans would be like, hey, why didn't you do it for this game? You did it for the other game. Is it employed in any ways that are different from White Album? Like showing elements moving that you couldn't move before? Basically, the characters are the only things moving. It wouldn't be possible to make the backgrounds move, but I think having new event CGs added would make the users happier than getting too absorbed in that. Oh yeah, absolutely. The new CGs that were added for the PS3 version are like, mwah, so good, so incredible. It really boosted the level of emotion that could be portrayed rather than just the stand-up characters. Apart from that, what other new components have been added? For the scenario, we placed great importance on migrating the world from the PC version over as carefully as possible. So our focus was on quality rather than quantity. But in terms of visuals, we wound up with a great number of event CGs than we initially planned. Also, given what a crucially important place sound occupies in White Album, we knew we would be adding new BGM tracks, but it became necessary to add new vocal tracks as well. The only thing was, we wanted to avoid having a song suddenly start playing over a scene where it didn't match. So we found places where a song would fit naturally, and added songs to fit those situations. Which of course is a great thing for Shimokawa to talk to because he overlooked a lot of the sound design for the game. Since I know this is something that often happens in ports, have there been any new heroines added? There aren't any new characters. I would have hated it. I don't know. I don't really like it when ports add new characters. What springs to mind is Persona 4 Golden. I did not like it when they added the new character to the Velvet Room. I don't like change that much, I guess. I do like when they change things up to a small degree, like with Todokanai Koi 13 instead of the original for the anime. But throwing in a new character just seems, it really does just seem like a money grab. Like, oh, you have the PC edition and the intro and the closing and the full edition and the PS. Now you have to buy the PS3 because there's a new character here. Like, we would, as fans, we would. But to me, nah, no point. Don't do that. To be honest, this was the topic of a great deal of discussion, and it was something we took time to consider as the whole crew. However, we determined that this story didn't have room for new characters to show up, so we focused instead on how to broaden the stories of Haruki and the others. We heard a lot of voices from fans who wanted developments that would expand the world, as with a fan disc. Yeah, drama CDs and showing like the after stories and stuff, that's cool. But I don't want some random new girl to be like, oh, hi, I'm a transfer student. And she has like blonde hair and she's perfect. Like, no. Winter comes for White Album. There's a web radio show starting in August. The White Album 2 Fan Club Radio, which is amazing, and you should listen to it, by the way. Is that something it will be okay to listen to before having played the PS3 release? I'm worried about spoilers. There shouldn't be any issue. In fact, if you listen, Kazusa and Setsuna's voices will be familiar to you by the time you do play the PS3 edition, so please do. The whole thing is moving forward with Maruto-san's full cooperation, so it should be very enjoyable. Because it's a radio show put on by the voice actresses of Kazusa and Setsuna, and it is very funny and it is very chill. Apart from the radio show, are there any other developments in the works, like for an anime or comic adaptation? Nothing is definite enough for me to be able to talk about it here. I will say that the staff have been expressing a desire for an anime adaptation, and there are various plans and projects currently in motion. My hope is that, starting with the PS3 release in winter of 2012, we'll be able to have something for each winter after that, until around the winter of 2014. The winter, of course, is going to be released in the winter. How could it not? I guess, if it came to an anime adaptation, it could be almost impossible to consolidate a story that's basically as long as 2 book volumes. In which case, given that he is the parent of the story, I may jokingly ask Maruto-san to do the composition and scenario of the series. Which is funny reading this after the fact, because he absolutely did ask Maruto-san to do the scenario, and Maruto did say yes, and it ended up coming out very well. It sounds like White Album 2 will end up being synonymous with winter. So, do you have a final message for our readers? White Album 2 is a work in which you can enjoy a realistic human drama of the sort that hasn't seen much in recent years, in which the story and music have been blended together. Not only is the story in a 2-part form, but even the BGM is subtly different between the first and second parts. I think that giving too much more information will detract from the experience, so please try to avoid spoilers as you wait for the game's release. If you really can't stand the wait and decide to play the previous game first, I think it might increase your enjoyment, even if only by a little. And this article was published in Dengeki PlayStation, volume 524, released August 9th, 2012. And as we know, since then the anime was released and became a huge hit, Although we are still praying for a second season because the anime only spanned introductory chapter. But for many reasons, it's probably difficult to condense that into an ending which everyone is satisfied by. So, thank you ever so much for joining me on this interview from White Album 2, and I'll be back reading more interviews in the future. So until then, hope you take care. See you!